It's me, Mario. I mean, what is there to say about Super Mario Bros. On the Nintendo Entertainment System that hasn't been said a billion times in newsletters, gaming magazines, cheat sheets, strategy guides, or YouTube videos? 40 years later, Mario is arguably the most popular video game character ever, generating into a franchise that has dived in every possible game genre and multiple supporting characters getting their own games and spawning a ton of merchandise, comic books, TV shows, and movies. But how did it all begin? Nintendo as a company have existed as early as 1889, making primarily playing cards. Their first foray into the video game industry began with the laser clay shooting system in 1973. They gained distribution rights to sell the Magnavox Odyssey in Japan, and released the Color TV game in 1977. But global success wouldn't come until the early 80s with the Game & Watch and the arcade title Donkey Kong. Designer Shigeru Miyamoto came up with the idea of having the player control Jumpman, jumping on sloped ramps, ladders, and separate platforms, all while avoiding barrels thrown by an angry ape to save the lady. Initially a Popeye game, but with characters changed after Nintendo couldn't get the license, Donkey Kong was considered one of the first platforming games ever made. It became a huge commercial hit and made Miyamoto Nintendo's golden goose. He continued making athletic games, as platformers were called back then, a term based on athletic obstacle courses that were becoming popular in Japan during the 1980s. Titles including sequels to Donkey Kong, where Jumpman was officially called Mario for the first time, with the latter being the main antagonist before eventually getting his own titular game called Mario Bros. Introducing Luigi as a two-player option made them plumbers instead of carpenters, exterminating dangerous critters through sets of pipes by punching the ground from below and literally kicking them while they're down. They added the last attack to spice up the gameplay, as hitting the ground only felt too easy during testing. That same year, Nintendo released the Family Computer, aka the Famicom, and Miyamoto went from working on arcade machines to strictly on this new system, as software was the real moneymaker for consoles to sell, and Japan's recent FUE Act restricted operating hours and customer age on arcade machines in the country. They formed Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development, or just EAD. Before then, Miyamoto did a lot of the development and design himself, but with the arrival of designer Takashi Tezuka, it shouldered some of the workload. The first games they worked on together were Devil World, Excitebike, and the home port of Kung Fu. And this is when programmer Toshihiko Nakako also joined Nintendo, forming the Golden Triangle together. When the time came to make another follow-up with the Mario Brothers, they didn't know it yet, but they were about to revolutionize the video game industry and having us all talk about Nintendo forever, probably. Development on Super Mario Bros. Began the same time as The Legend of Zelda, with any ideas that might not have worked for Mario being implemented into Zelda instead. What Miyamoto wanted was to have a character that can change size throughout the game. Make a big character that jumps around on vast levels where the screen had to have another color other than black, and had to scroll. One big influence was Pac-Land, a platformer which had a background that wasn't black and could scroll horizontally as the Pac-Man moved. And thanks to Devil World and Excitebike, they had the technological know-how to pull these things off on the Famicom. Miyamoto called it a culmination of everything they learned after 3 years of development on that system. The developers designed the levels made for the small Mario sprite in mind, so the player can see as much on screen as possible. But they weren't adamant on making the character large on screen. They had to find a balance of being able to see ahead while moving, but see the character enough to have its own characteristics, gameplay wise and personality. And that's where they came up with the idea of power-ups to make Mario bigger over time. But why mushrooms? According to Miyamoto, there were plenty of folk tales of people wandering into forests and eating mushrooms all the time, so it seemed logical to call the in-game world Mushroom Kingdom, which sparked further development on the plot, including mushroom-like characters like Toad or Princess Toadstool, part of that fantasy element. They were also originally planning to design flying stages, with an early control layout being B to run, A to attack, and to jump you press up on the D-pad. But Miyamoto wanted to put total focus on the on-foot action. Those shooter stages did eventually appear in Super Mario Land on the Game Boy a few years later. And finally, Mario initially had the ability to ride on an animal like a dinosaur or lizard, something Miyamoto really wanted to do in Mario 3, but technical limitations of the NES made it impossible to make it work. But again, this feature would be revised when they had a more powerful system to work with, to incredible success. Even though this was basically a launch title for the NES outside of Japan, because the Famicom had been out for a few years, it was meant to be the final exclamation point, the grand culmination for the cartridge format before the disk system add-on, which provided more memory at a cheaper price to manufacture. The cartridge size before they added extra chips to enhance the capabilities for other popular titles that came after. Super Mario Bros. Is only 40 kilobits, literally a 32nd of a megabyte, so the developers had to use whatever space they could scrounge to achieve all the technical targets they wanted to achieve. Clouds and grass are the same image, just a different color. Some sprites were half images that were flipped, and the bricks on the blocks are the same material as the castles. They even gave themselves 100 kilobits of space in case they needed to clear out any bugs or glitches, so when there weren't any, at least not game-breaking ones, they'd fill the rest of the memory with more enemies and blocks on the levels. Even the appearance of this super Italian-American plumber was designed with purpose. He has a mustache, so they didn't have to draw a mouth. He wore a hat, so they didn't have to animate hair, reducing pixels and animation. And because he ran, they wanted to make it clearly look like he's running with only a few frames of animation. He wears overalls because 1, he's a plumber, but 2, so his arms and body are a different color, so you can tell he's running. This was back when they were designing Mario for Donkey Kong, but it makes sense when you look at his appearance and movement in Super Mario Bros. The game was scheduled for a summer break release, but it wasn't ready yet, and they were given 3 more weeks to clean the game up, coin adjustments, glitches, a few extra blocks, and once they completed the game, something we know today is revolutionary and important to the entire video game industry, they only celebrated for a few hours and move on to the next project. After all, they were in the middle of developing another game almost just as revolutionary. Though when they saw the testers not go home even though they were done for the day, Miyamoto told Tezuka they might be onto something big here. Super Mario Bros. Was released for the Famicom in Japan on September 13th, 1985, but for the rest of the world it would prove to be a little difficult for Nintendo to release the game, particularly in North America. In 1982, Nintendo got tangled in a lawsuit with Universal Studios over Donkey Kong, claiming it infringed on the King Kong IP they thought they owned, though Nintendo famously won that case with ease. And when Atari discovered an unlicensed Donkey Kong port being played on a Coleco Atom, a rival system at the Consumer Electronics Show in 1983. It caused a potential deal with Nintendo to distribute the Famicom worldwide except Japan to collapse. It's amazing how a cartoon gaming ape can cause such a shitstorm with so many companies in real life. And around the same time, the North American gaming market crashed due to an out-of-control saturation of consoles and games, most of them in poor quality, so retailers didn't want to touch one with a 50-foot pole. Nintendo spent the next couple of years trying to convince retailers to sell the Famicom, mostly by trying to hide the true nature of the console with a name change, an exterior redesign, and adding accessories like the zapper and a robotic operating bunny so they can say, see, it's a toy, not a video game system. This didn't convince them, and Nintendo of America president Minoru Arakawa considered giving up. However, the Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi wasn't having it. The Famicom was a big seller in Japan, and he knew the size of the North American market was worth the persistence. The first big breakthrough was in New York when they did a test launch in 1985 trying to sell the NES consoles personally, and Arakawa went over Yamauchi's head by assuring retailers they would receive full refunds on any unsold console. A complete no-risk proposition for retailers, but a massive gamble for Nintendo that paid off, and a few months later they continued planting the seeds across the states, so Super Mario Bros. Was at the right place at the right time. However, it's unknown which day Super Mario Bros. Was released in North America exactly, with reports and articles claiming to be between October 1985 to March 1986. Like, there's literally no record or concrete proof on the exact date. However, by the end of 86, when the console was widely available across the United States, as well as the rest of the world by the end of 87, it was normal for Super Mario Bros. To come bundled with the console. It was re-released in 88 with a Zapper and Duck Hunt in a 2-in-1 cartridge. There's also a 3-in-1 cartridge with Super Mario Bros., Tetris, and Nintendo World Cup, and it was bundled with the revised NES top loader. So with many re-releases and bundling with the console throughout its life cycle, you can begin to see why Super Mario Bros. Was #1 on the best-selling video games ever for a long time. Pretty much every NES in the household had this game on the shelves. Although not the the first Mario game, it is the most influential. Donkey Kong put Mario on the map and made Nintendo popular outside Japan, but Super Mario Bros. Made them as recognizable as Coca-Cola or Disney. It's been talked about for literally decades. Every gaming YouTube channel has at least mentioned it once. The character has built potentially 1 billion childhoods. However, because I was born nearly a decade after Super Mario Bros., my introduction to Mario in Nintendo comes from my cousin's N64 with Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Mario Tennis, Mario Party, and Super Mario Land 2 on the Game Boy. But my experience with Mario on the NES was too brief to even remember. Emulators from the mid-2000s were the first time I gave Mario titles, particularly Super Mario Bros. 3, a proper go. That said, because of the significance and impact this game had on the industry before and after to this day, Super Mario Bros. On the NES is a game I've wanted to review since creating this channel. However, I've always held back because 1, Nintendo and their hostility towards YouTube, especially around the time I created my channel, also made me hesitate to even mention the company on earlier videos. 2, the popularity of the racing and open world genre encouraged me to ride the wave, to think more what the YouTube algorithm likes, what would get the most views. But now I've decided to completely ignore it and just make reviews on games that I want to review and make the best video possible, hopefully. And finally, Super Mario Bros. Reached its 40th anniversary this year, and after buying a Nintendo Switch 2 recently as a birthday present for myself, I downloaded Nintendo Classics with literally hundreds of old masterpieces to play while I was on holidays. So for this review, I'll be playing Super Mario Bros. On the Switch 2, though I will use the NES controller to demonstrate the controls on camera. According to the manual, life was peaceful in the Mushroom Kingdom, but that peace was shattered by the Koopa, a turtle tribe who are masters of black magic, turning all the mushroom people to bricks and stones, leaving the kingdom in ruin. And the only one that can undo the spell is Princess Toadstool, daughter of the Mushroom King, who is held captive by the Great Koopa King, aka Bowser. And Mario goes on a quest to save the princess from the clutches of the evil Koopa King. As we discussed, Mushroom Kingdom first came when reading folk stories of people eating mushrooms, so design and backstory was incredibly straightforward. Additionally, Miyamoto was a fan of comic books inside and outside of Japan and liked drawing characters with Western features. With Mario and Luigi, because this game is set underground, a plumber sounded like the most plausible occupation. The backstory for Mario and Luigi with this game is they entered the kingdom from a magic pipe while working as plumbers in New York. Basically the plot to the Super Mario Bros. Movie in 2023, but according to Miyamoto, that is the backstory for the brothers back in the early arcade and Famicom era. Both Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers are set in New York, and they have their own family, which they have dinner with every night. That and Mario is named after Mario Siegel, who rented out a warehouse to Nintendo of America at that time and is of Italian descent. Luigi was initially designed just to clearly distinguish between both characters with their jumpsuit colors when you select the two-player mode, but he would become another important character in the franchise and even get his own standalone games. The Mansion titles I definitely recommend. It's kind of clever with what they designed back then with the memory limitations and how they were able to make plausible explanations for everything storyline-wise. With all that said though, Bowser kidnaps the princess, Mario off to the rescue, and like Shakespeare, a story that has been retold 1,000,000 times today. So you played this knowing exactly what the plot is without even thinking about it, even if you've never read the manual. And the story isn't described in the main menu, it just goes straight to the beginning. I mean, what can you say? It's the definition of classic, probably the biggest Bowser-sized understatement. The colorful graphics, level design, and the music that gets drowned by the sound effects, so unless you stand still, it's a little out of tune, a common trait for most NES games. Miyamoto realized after Donkey Kong, because the programmers and designers were also composing the music, Koji Kondo, who only joined Nintendo a year before this game's release and only worked on sound effects up to that point, was the composer and continues to make music for the Mario series to this day. So like the rest of the development team for this game, the resume speaks for itself. The first song Kondo composed for the outdoor levels was actually scrapped because no one matched with the landscape, it didn't match the gameplay, so he changed his approach to all songs from a gameplay perspective, and in turn made songs that, while basic, again, classic. Everybody watching this and all their family members recognize these tracks. It's only one song based on each environment the level is based on: outdoors, underground, underwater, and castle, so not much variety. And because the tracks are short, it can sound repetitive, especially when spending 70% of the whole playthrough outdoors. But its iconic status and catchiness is enough to never sound annoying. The first level, World 1-1, is basically a tutorial that teaches you everything you need to know without instructions on the screen. Things like, what do these flashing boxes with question marks do? How do you kill the enemies? What do these green pipes do? Why do some blocks appear hidden? It might be primitive and completely second nature for many, but back then, you have to put yourself back to 1985 to understand how detailed this was for any video game. It was vibrant. It was by far one of the most vibrant and colorful games out there, and you can say that about every Mario title each passing generation, and it wasn't stuck on one screen. Instead of jumping on turtles surrounded by pipes and a power block, you are now in a fantasy world with mushrooms, caves, rivers, and castles. It was the gap that separated from one generation of gaming to another. It was something totally different, and there were so many different ways to play it. Scattered all over the levels are coins, blocks, and boxes with question marks on them. These either give you coins or power-ups, like the mushroom, which makes Mario twice the size, can break the blocks and take 1 hit point. Another is the fire flower, which gives you the ability to shoot projectiles. And the Starman makes you briefly invincible, showing every enemy what it feels like if you have only 1 hit point. There was talk over whether Mario should start the level with a large character, but Miyamoto wanted the player to feel happy when they got the power up, to earn something that was worth fighting for. Levels are scattered with green pipes, also inspired by New York with the pipe system, which sent you to an underground room full of coins to collect, and some question mark boxes grew vines and you can climb to the clouds to collect more coins. And of course, to complete a level, you reach as high as you can on the flagpole to remove the skull flag and claim the castle. Mario breaks the blocks with his fists. It took me years to realize that's Mario holding his fist up to avoid CTA later in life. However, going back to the story, the Koopas turn the mushroom people into blocks, so... Oh shit. Now I'm questioning who the real villain is, unless Mario doesn't know that. Maybe it's part of Bowser's evilness, but pretty dark when you think about it. I mean, at least you have a plausible explanation as to why all the levels are only scattered with enemies. These include Goombas, Koopa Troopers, which can be used as hockey pucks to sweep enemies. Some have wings named Koopa Paratroopers, piranha plants that pop out of the pipes, Laticus that throw red spinies that can't be landed on, and bullet bills, which are basically missile-shaped cannons. For the amount of space that the developers had, there's plenty of variety with the type of enemies you face, which are distinctly cartoony, with the bullet bills having arms and eyes, for example. The Koopas could have easily been just turtles, but each character model has some personality, at least compared to other video games around that time. Fun fact, these little Goombas were the last thing implemented in the entire game. It was compiled of nothing but turtle enemies, but enemies that took 2 hits non-stop was too challenging when testing it. That, and they were a memory-saving measure as another half-image flip to look like a full one. Anyway, the only enemy I truly hate is the Hammer Brother, which can throw hammers and jump high, both at a random rate. Immune to shell attacks, and you can die if they just have a hammer in their hand, even if you kill them. With the controls, depending on how long you press the A button, controls the height of your jump, and pressing the D-pad while in midair steers Mario jump in midair. When you're running and then jumping, you can get an even larger height, which is required on some of those tricky gaps, and he also doesn't stop instantly after you let go of the D-pad, so there's a little bit of weight to the character. In fact, gravity is heavy since Mario was a bit of a chubby plumber in the 8-bit era. The platforms, particularly the thin ones, can be slippery, so when the levels get harder and the pressure to avoid enemies and make the odd leap of faith over the pits increases, which I'll get to, it's easy to get ahead of yourself and miscalculate the momentum and fall to your death before you can press the jump button at the last millisecond, making you look like an idiot. Thank God we got a dedicated button for jumping. It's proven in some games that do have up to jump. Having one thumb do everything wears quickly. I know this might sound like a basic breakdown of the most played video game of the century. It's so second nature to possibly 100 million people that it's easy to forget this level of control was set over 40 years ago, and it is a significant improvement from the predecessors. In Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers, if you jump, you have no control of your momentum in midair, so if you play Super Mario Brothers before the arcade titles, you think, ooh, suddenly it feels counterintuitive. Also in Donkey Kong, falling from too great of a height can kill you. Like imagine if other Mario games today did that as well. Being able to have this level of control of your character and being so simple to pick up and play, this is the time-tested approved template for any side-scrolling 2D platformer. Every game that comes after should be required to have this level of basic control to be decent. The whole Mushroom Kingdom consists of 8 worlds with 4 levels each, all of them throwing a surprise at you, whether it's a different level type like swimming underwater where fire projectiles are your only form of defense, an introduction of a new enemy, or ones constantly flying off screen including bullet bills and Cheep Cheeps. It's then I noticed that a couple of levels are recycled with more enemies or fireballs, but at least the difficulty curve is set perfectly. And every world concludes inside a castle with no coins, only a couple of power-ups and lots of fire and lava, culminating in a boss battle against Bowser where you need to reach the axe on the other side of the screen to send him to hell. Either that or use the fire projectiles, and every time you defeat him, Toad, or a mushroom retainer as the manual calls him, thanks you, but the princess is in another castle. Lovely, and you'll hear this 6 more times since each Bowser in these castles are just Koopa impersonators. Yeah, spoiler, but as a child in 1985, did they care? I mean, I wouldn't have. Considering their expertise in black magic, at least it's plausible. The challenge comes in the castle designs that throw puzzles without warning. Some require you to go through the platforms or pipes in the correct way, or otherwise they keep looping endlessly until you get it right. And each Bowser showdown gradually increases the number of obstacles blocking the axe. It's disappointing that points have no effect on the gameplay, like reaching a point milestone would equal an extra life or something. It would give you more incentive to kill enemies and reach as high as the flagpole as you can each time you complete a level. But I suppose you have multiple ways to gain lives, including mushrooms, coins, and killing a consecutive number of enemies in one shell attack, which the Mario series later down the line would use to make moments like that common and obvious, but oh so satisfying. So with the enemy placement and how easy it is to slip off the platform before jumping at the last millisecond, this game is not as easy as you might think. And since this predated The Legend of Zelda and Metroid, there are no save states either, no passwords. Obviously with games being short, you don't want consumers finishing it the day they buy it. It had to be a challenge. You can continue by pressing A and start at the same time in the main menu, and I only discovered this while researching this game to make sure you don't go all the way back with no continues, because that honestly sounds too sadistic for a game this popular. But even then, you go back to the start of a world, so say you keep going game over on that Hammer Brother in the castle, which is the real final boss in my opinion, given how hard it is to pass him, you go back to World 8-1. It's one of the main reasons the Warp Zone, where you can jump on top of the screen where you can access different worlds, was created, to get through certain levels quickly. Because there's no password or save feature, this was the best they could come up with back then. I'll confess, for this playthrough I'm using save states to complete the game faster, but I have completed it fair and square before, so I understand how difficult it can get, particularly on the final world. However, after you beat the game, you can press B to select a different world in a hard mode that replaces the Goombas with buzzy beetles that are immune to fire and block attacks. All enemies move faster and there's more fire to dodge in the castle. Not exactly Lost levels hard, but enough to be considered a steep challenge. That was another thing that stood out, Super Mario Bros. Having so many hidden secrets, glitches, or blocks, including one-up mushrooms, vines, or pipes that you can go under, even if they're guarded by a piranha plant. And thanks to the run button, it's fun to try and complete the levels as quickly as possible each time you boot up the game, particularly the first world. In fact, this is what inspired Yuji Naka with the creation of Sonic the Hedgehog, trying to get through a level at top speed. Going back to the Warp Zone, one of the most famous glitches where the end of World 1-2 next to the pipe that spits you up to the flagpole, if you break a couple of blocks, yeah, commit murder a couple of times, and then perform a specific jump, stand still, you go through the blocks and go down the first pipe before the Warp Zone is triggered, and then it takes you to World -1, which is basically World 7-2 that loops forever. So it's technically unbeatable. It's a glitch that carries into each version of Super Mario Bros. With varying results. All Stars version, for example, just takes you straight to World 4 as if it isn't a glitch at all. It's worth noting this is actually called World 36-1, the first digit just couldn't fit in the level title. But imagine discovering this on your own NES in the 1980s. Because again, take yourself back to that year when you were a kid and you got an NES bundle with Super Mario Bros, so chances are you only had that game to play, so you wanted to make the most of it, and that made it a little easier to discover hidden secrets like this. Speaking of different versions, let's look at other ports of Super Mario Bros., the most notable ones made by Nintendo themselves. Despite being more focused on trying to complete the game than getting the highest score, it did get an arcade release on the Versus system, which I briefly played on at the classic section at PAX one time. I'm not sure it was a Versus system or not, but I definitely remember playing this game using a joystick and push buttons, which felt as counterintuitive as you'd expect. A port was also released on the Famicom disk system, but apart from a different Minus World, it didn't fully utilize the advantages over the cartridge, like there were no bonus levels or save feature. But the most iconic re-release, and my favorite way to play this game, is Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo. A compilation so good it deserves its own review in the future, including all the NES Mario titles remade from the ground up, yet completely faithful to the NES originals. So I'll only be brief. The first time I ever had Super Mario Bros. In the household was when I got a secondhand Super Nintendo in 2014, when this massive spark for nostalgia and video games went off, in turn starting this very YouTube channel. And it came bundled with Super Mario All-Stars and Starwing, aka Star Fox. I also got Super Mario World and Donkey Kong Country a month later, and to this day this is literally my entire physical Super Nintendo collection. With this version, hit detection is less sensitive when in contact with enemies, and because Mario is less blocky in 16-bit form, you have a better idea of where the edge is before you jump at the last millisecond, making it easy to calculate the jumps even at top speeds. Again, I'm probably going too deep into the details, but it just feels better and fairer to play. Other additions include the option to save your progress, although it only saves at the beginning of a world, not a level. In the castles, the fireballs shoot higher, making them easier to avoid, and the part where you need to go through the platforms in the correct way, you get a sound effect letting you know if it was correct or not. Another version was when my sister-in-law found her Game Boy Color as she was packing up to move in with my brother into a new house together. It had Super Mario Bros. Deluxe inserted in there, and she just let me have it. And it was the first Game Boy I ever owned after years of trying to pester my parents into getting me one as a kid to no success, but better late than never. And not a bad game to start with. I mean, it's Super Mario Bros. On the go. This version has separate save profiles, a little hub world for each level, and includes the Lofts levels, aka Super Mario Bros. 2 in Japan. So for a Game Boy Color title, there's a lot of levels here. It's a big game. The most notable addition is the challenge mode, where you replay completed levels with things to collect, including coins, Yoshi eggs, and reaching a target score. A versus mode where two players can link two Game Boys together so they can race against each other to complete a level. And you versus Boo, where you race against the annoying ghosts on these levels. Because of the screen size of the Game Boy Color, the field of view isn't great, and it tries to compensate by giving you the option to crop the screen above or below with the D-pad. But there are plenty of moments where you're taking giant leaps of faith, not knowing if the platform is there below, or a cheap instantly killing you, cheaply. Can't even imagine the difficulty playing the Lost levels on this tiny screen. But considering this is running on the Game Boy so you can play this on the go, built from the ground up, and provides multiple ways to complete these levels, it's a neat novelty to have when it was released in 1999. There was also a Game Boy Advance port released as part of the NES Classic lineup, which included Excitebike, Legend of Zelda, Metroid, and Castlevania. But unlike Deluxe, it's just a standard port with no special features. Considering Mario 2 and 3 on the NES came to the GBA as enhanced versions of otherwise faithful remakes of the All-Star compilation, it's a little disappointing they sort of phoned in this version, but it's everything I've talked about in this review on the go in the 2000s, so an excellent game nonetheless, albeit gravity's a little heavier. With 40 million copies sold on the NES alone, one of the best-selling video games of all time for a very long time, it took Nintendo themselves to surpass it 21 years later with Wii Sports. So it's safe to say it's one of the easiest games to get your hands on, if you haven't yet, which I doubt. Words would never do justice on the impact Super Mario Bros. Had on the gaming industry from 1985 to 40 years later. It has literally become a template for all 2D platformers that came after, and potentially expanded other genres to up their game come the next generation of games that were about to become as popular and profitable as movies or TV shows. It falls in that category of, while incredibly basic in its shapes and colors with one background, it still controls well enough that it's easy to pick up and enjoy playing even over 40 years later. Old school, not outdated. And if I had a criticism, all I did was take myself back to 1985 and look at what else there was in the gaming world, the state it was in. And then it continued to improve all the way to the point where Mario games today look like this. You look at the premise of Super Mario Bros. And the formula, at least in the 2D series, hasn't really changed, just slowly added more and more. But the basics, including power-ups, enemy types, characters, Mushroom Kingdom, are all integral to the franchise with such attention to detail, unmatched by others in the genre, making each level feel satisfying to clear at any pace. It's one of those games like this, Tetris, Pong, Doom, or Zelda, where anyone who has even the tiniest casual interest in the media, no matter what generation you're from, must play at least once. Like, it literally saved the video game industry, and for that, Nintendo, the team behind this game, all whom still work for the company to this day, fun fact, we salute you. Yes, we'll always have our disagreements, the price of your games, and clamping down on copyright rules like a tyrannical dictator, but deep down, we'll always be grateful for what you did for the video game industry, so thank you, Nintendo. Thanks everyone on Patreon, including Anthony Cossins, Bibbs, Brittleback, Carrington, Jones, Cooper Munn, Darcy McIntosh, Dave Dingledore, Atmosphere, Indie DM, Nightkick Gaming, Oscar, Ruben Petcog, Sam Sneed, Tickford45, Thomas Rosendale, UZ Racer, Will Stokes, and everyone for watching this review. Good to be back. Spenny out.